The Galactic Council Chamber was the largest structure ever built by intelligent beings. It floated at the exact center of known space, a sphere of pure crystal spanning 800 kilometers across. Inside, 17,000 alien species had gathered for the most important trial in galactic history. At the center of it all stood one, human. Thomas Reed kept his hands steady at his sides, though his heart was racing. The chamber stretched impossibly in every direction, filled with beings that defied human understanding. Some were made of light. Others existed as clouds of intelligent gas. A few seemed to occupy multiple dimensions at once, their forms shifting in ways that made his eyes water. High above, the Grand Arbiter spoke. The being was ancient beyond measure, a collection of floating geometric shapes that pulsed with each word. Its voice did not travel through air, but appeared directly in the minds of every creature present. Human Thomas Reed, you have committed a crime against all life in this galaxy. You have entered a place that was forbidden before your species learned to walk upright. You have awakened technology that was sealed away when the first stars of this galaxy were still young. Thomas said nothing. He had learned patience during his 30 years of deep space exploration. He would wait for the right moment. The punishment, the Arbiter continued, is death. For you and for your entire species. Every human on every world will be removed from existence. Your homeworld will be reduced to atoms. It will be as if humanity never existed at all. The chamber erupted in sounds of approval. Clicks, whistles, vibrations, and frequencies beyond human hearing all expressed satisfaction at this verdict. Thomas allowed himself to observe the crowd, noting which species seemed most eager for humanity's destruction. Do you have any words before sentence is carried out? The Arbiter asked. Thomas smiled. It was not a nervous smile or a defeated one. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for exactly this question. Yes, he said. I would like to present evidence. The chamber fell silent. Evidence was a human concept, one that most galactic species found primitive and unnecessary. The Arbiter's geometric forms spun faster, a sign of confusion. Evidence of what? Evidence that the Council itself has been violating its own laws for the past 40,000 years. The silence became absolute. Even the energy beings stopped their constant movement. Thomas reached into his exploration suit and withdrew a small device, no larger than his thumb. It projected a hologram into the air above him, filling the massive chamber with images that made several species cry out in shock. The hologram showed the fortress he had discovered, a structure of impossible beauty and terrifying power, hidden in a fold of space that should not exist. But that was not what made the Council react with such horror. It was the second image. A record he had found deep within the fortress archives. A record showing Council ships visiting the structure, again and again, across thousands of years. The fortress, Thomas said calmly, was supposed to be sealed forever. No one was meant to enter. That was the law passed by this very Council 70,000 years ago. But someone has been entering regularly. Someone has been taking technology from its vaults and using it. Someone on this Council. The Arbiter's voice thundered through every mind. This is impossible. The fortress location was erased from all records. Almost all records, Thomas corrected. The predecessors who built it were thorough. They left backup copies hidden on primitive worlds across the galaxy, set to reveal themselves when those species reached the stars. Earth received one such copy. It took my grandmother 60 years to decode it, and it took me another 30 to follow the map it contained. He advanced the hologram, showing detailed logs of Council vessels docking with the fortress. Dates, times, cargo manifests. Weapons technology transferred to favored species. Medical advances given to some, while others were left to suffer plagues that could have been cured. The Vryn received faster-than-light communication 4,000 years before any other species. The Colthari were given shields that made their fleets invincible. The Luminari obtained the secret of energy-based consciousness. All from the fortress. All in violation of the very laws you now seek to use against humanity. Ambassador Thylos of the Vryn rose from his seat, his many limbs trembling with rage. These records are fabricated. Human lies designed to escape justice. Then you will not object to an independent verification, Thomas replied smoothly. I have copies stored in 17 different locations across the galaxy, each one set to broadcast to every species simultaneously if I do not return safely to Earth within 30 days. The verification codes are embedded in the records themselves, using predecessor encryption that cannot be faked. The chamber descended into chaos. Species that had been allies for millennia now looked at each other with suspicion. Those who had always wondered why certain civilizations advanced so quickly were beginning to understand. Thomas raised his voice, cutting through the noise. I am not asking for humanity to receive special treatment. I am asking for the same treatment. If the fortress knowledge exists, it should belong to everyone equally. If it is to remain sealed, then everyone who has benefited from it must return what they took. The Arbiter's forms had stopped spinning entirely, a sign of deep contemplation. You understand what you are proposing? You would tear apart alliances that have maintained peace for longer than your species has existed. Peace built on inequality is not peace, Thomas answered. It is simply oppression that has not yet been challenged. My species learned that lesson painfully throughout our history. We nearly destroyed ourselves learning it. But we did learn it. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes, sensors, and perception organs of as many species as he could. Humanity does not want war. We do not want to destroy the Council or overthrow the Galactic Order. We want to be part of it. But we will not be part of the system that punishes us for discovering secrets that others have been exploiting for millennia. A new voice spoke from the council seats. It belonged to a being of pure sound, its words creating visible ripples in the air. The human speaks of equality, but humanity has been among the stars for only 300 years. You have not earned the right to stand among elder species. Thomas turned to face the speaker. And how does a species earn that right? By waiting patiently while others receive advantages we are denied? By accepting a universe where the rules apply differently depending on who you are? He shook his head slowly. On Earth, we had nations that believed exactly that. They built empires based on the idea that some peoples were meant to rule and others were meant to serve. Those empires fell, every single one, because eventually the people they oppressed found ways to challenge them, sometimes through war, sometimes through discovery, sometimes simply by refusing to accept the story they were told about their own worthlessness. The chamber had grown quiet again, listening. I found the fortress because a predecessor placed a map on my world 70,000 years ago. They did it deliberately. They chose Earth, among millions of primitive planets, to receive this gift. I do not know why. Perhaps they saw something in our ancestors. Perhaps it was random chance. But the map was there, and I followed it. Thomas stepped forward, his voice growing stronger. Now you must decide. Will you execute me and condemn humanity, only to have the truth broadcast across the galaxy anyway? Will you admit that the laws you enforce were never meant to apply equally? Or will you do something that your council has never done in its entire history? The Arbiter's question came softly, almost hesitantly. And what is that? Thomas met the ancient being's incomprehensible gaze without fear. Change. The word hung in the air, carrying weight far beyond its single syllable. In chambers across the massive sphere, species who had never questioned the galactic order began to whisper among themselves. Those who had benefited from the secret fortress technology grew nervous. And those who had always suspected that something was wrong finally had. Confirmation. Thomas Reed stood alone at the center of it all, waiting for the Council's response. Whatever came next would determine the fate of his species, and perhaps the future of the entire galaxy. The Arbiter's forms began to spin once more, faster than ever before. The Council will deliberate. This session is suspended. As security drones moved to escort Thomas away, he caught glimpses of frantic conversations breaking out across the chamber. Alliances were shifting. Suspicions were growing. The carefully maintained balance of galactic power was beginning to crack. And somewhere in the depths of space, the ancient fortress waited, its secrets ready to reshape everything. 3 days had passed since Thomas Reed shattered the Galactic Council's carefully maintained illusions. Now he sat in a detention cell designed for beings far more dangerous than any human, watching the galaxy tear itself apart through a small viewing screen. The news feeds showed riots on 100 worlds. Species that had trusted the Council for millennia were demanding answers. How long had the fortress been secretly accessed? Who had benefited? Who had been deliberately left behind? The Vryn ambassador had been forced to flee his own homeworld when citizens discovered that their species' famous communication technology had not been invented, but stolen. The Kolthari fleet had split into factions, some defending their government and others demanding that the illegally obtained shield technology be shared with all species. Thomas watched it all with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. He had expected disruption, but this was approaching chaos. The door to his cell opened, and a figure entered that made Thomas rise to his feet immediately. It was the Grand Arbiter itself, its geometric forms somehow squeezed into the small space, pulsing with colors that his translator could not interpret. "Human Thomas Reed," the Arbiter said, and Thomas noticed something new in its voice. "Uncertainty. You have created a crisis that threatens to destroy everything the Council has built." "The crisis existed long before I arrived," Thomas replied carefully. "I simply revealed it." The Arbiter's forms spun slowly. "You are correct. And that is why I have come. The Council has deliberated and reached a decision regarding your fate and the fate of your species." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. For all his confident words in the chamber, he knew that the Council had the power to make good on its threats. Human colonies were scattered across a dozen star systems, but they were young and vulnerable. A coordinated strike could end humanity in a matter of hours. "The Council has decided," the Arbiter continued, "to offer humanity a choice." This was unexpected. Thomas remained silent, waiting. "You will lead an expedition to the fortress. A mixed delegation of species, including representatives from both the privileged and the excluded. You will catalog everything within its vaults. And you will help the Council decide how this knowledge should be distributed." Thomas considered this carefully. "And if I refuse? Then humanity will be quarantined to your home system, but not destroyed. The fortress will be sealed permanently, with all records erased. The species who benefited from its technology will keep what they have, but receive nothing more. The galaxy will return to the way it was, with the truth buried once again." It was a clever offer. It gave Thomas exactly what he had asked for on the surface, while leaving the fundamental inequalities in place. Those who had already stolen advantages would suffer no consequences. Those who had been denied would simply be told to accept their fate. "That is not equality," Thomas said. "That is maintaining the current order with a fresh coat of paint." "It is a compromise," the Arbiter replied. "Something your species should understand. Absolute justice is impossible. Every solution creates new problems. The question is whether you can accept imperfection in exchange for progress." Thomas walked to the viewing screen, watching more footage of galactic unrest. A transport ship was burning in orbit around a Kolthari colony world. Protesters were being dispersed with crowd control weapons on a Vryn station. How many will die if this continues? He asked quietly. Projections suggest between 50 and 200 billion casualties over the next decade if the current trajectory continues, the Arbiter answered. Civil wars, broken alliances, resource conflicts. The structures that maintained peace are crumbling faster than anyone anticipated. Thomas closed his eyes. He had known there would be consequences, but hearing the numbers made them real in a way he had avoided considering. I will lead your expedition, he said finally. But I have conditions. Name them. First, the delegation must include species that the Council has traditionally ignored. The smaller civilizations. The ones without military power or economic influence. They have as much right to this knowledge as anyone. The Arbiter's forms flickered. Agreed. Second, everything we find will be documented and eventually shared with all Council members. Not immediately, if some technologies are too dangerous for rapid distribution, but within my lifetime, assuming I survive this mission. Define your lifetime. Humans live approximately 100 years without technological enhancement. Agreed. Continue. Third, the species who stole Fortress technology must face some form of accountability. Not destruction, not war, but acknowledgement. A formal admission of what they did and some form of reparation to those they harmed. The Arbiter was silent for a long moment. This will be the most difficult condition to accept. The Vryn, the Kolthari, the Luminari, they are powerful beyond your understanding. They will not willingly admit wrongdoing. Then perhaps they should consider what happens if they refuse, Thomas said. I have backup copies of every record I found, remember? Including detailed logs of exactly which species took what and when. If the Council cannot bring itself to demand accountability, I can ensure the information reaches every corner of the galaxy. You would risk renewed chaos? Thomas turned to face the Arbiter directly. I would prefer order, but not order maintained through lies and privilege. My species has a saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Secrets protected by power will always eventually be revealed. Better to control that revelation than to have it explode unpredictably. The Arbiter's geometric forms rearranged themselves into a pattern Thomas had not seen before. It might have been respect. Your conditions will be presented to the Council. I cannot guarantee acceptance, but I will advocate for them personally. In the meantime, you will be transferred to more comfortable quarters and allowed to begin preparations for the expedition. The ancient being moved toward the door, then paused. Human Thomas read, I have existed for 17 million years. I have watched civilizations rise and fall. I have seen the predecessors at the height of their power and witnessed their final departure from this reality. Thomas waited, sensing that something important was coming. In all that time, I have never seen a species quite like yours. You are young, fragile, short-lived. By any reasonable measure, you should be insignificant. Yet you found what we hid. You challenged what we built. And now you are forcing us to become something different. The Arbiter's voice carried something that might have been wonder. When the predecessors left their maps on your world, perhaps they saw something we have missed. Perhaps humanity carries a quality that cannot be measured by technology, or lifespan, or military power. What quality would that be? Thomas asked. Hope, the Arbiter said simply. The belief that things can be better. Most elder species lose that eventually. We become comfortable with the way things are. We stop imagining that change is possible. But you humans seem incapable of accepting the world as it is. You always reach for something more. With that, the ancient being departed, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts and the weight of what lay ahead. The expedition would be dangerous. The fortress contained technology that had destroyed civilizations far older and more advanced than humanity. Some of its vaults had been sealed for reasons that the predecessors themselves had considered necessary. Opening them could unleash consequences that no one could predict. But the alternative was worse. A galaxy fractured by revealed secrets. Wars fought over stolen technology. Billions dead because powerful species refused to share what they had taken. Thomas looked at his hands. The hands of a simple explorer who had stumbled upon something beyond his understanding. In 30 days, he would enter the most ancient structure in the galaxy and begin cataloging the accumulated wisdom of 7 previous galactic civilizations. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, he felt something he had not experienced since first launching into space as a young man. He felt like an adventurer. The viewing screen showed another update. The council was convening an emergency session. Representatives were debating Thomas's conditions. Some were outraged. Others, surprisingly, were supportive. Species that had long suspected the truth were now demanding that their suspicions be confirmed. That change was coming to the galaxy, whether the powerful wanted it or not. And humanity, the youngest of the starfaring species, would be at the center of it all. Thomas allowed himself a small smile. His grandmother had spent her entire life decoding the predecessor map, never living to see where it led. His parents had supported his exploration career, despite the dangers and the isolation. Every human who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there had contributed to this moment. The fortress awaited. Its secrets would reshape the future. And Thomas Reed, a human adventurer who had refused to accept the limits placed upon him, would be the one to open his doors. Outside his cell, he could hear movement. The council was preparing. The expedition was becoming real. In the depths of space, the ancient fortress continued its eternal patience, waiting as it had waited for 70,000 years. Waiting for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to claim what it contained. That someone had finally arrived. The expedition vessel emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the hidden zone, and Thomas Reed felt his breath catch in his throat. Seeing the fortress through recorded footage had not prepared him for experiencing it in person. That it hung against the backdrop of a dead nebula, a geometric impossibility that seemed to bend space around itself. The structure absorbed starlight rather than reflecting it, appearing as a deeper darkness against the already black void. Only its edges were visible, outlined by a faint luminescence that hurt to observe directly. Behind Thomas, the assembled delegation fell silent. 12 species were represented on this vessel, ranging from the powerful Vryn and Kolthari to small civilizations most had never heard of. The Arbiter had kept its word. Everyone would have a voice in what was discovered. Beginning approach vector, the pilot announced. A Kolthari female named Vestra, who had defected from her government to join the expedition. External sensors are struggling to maintain lock. The fortress is generating some kind of interference. Thomas moved to the observation deck, where the full majesty of the ancient structure became visible through reinforced crystal windows. "It is not interference," he said quietly. "It is a test. The predecessors built their installations to be found only by those worthy of finding them. And how does one prove worthiness to a dead civilization?" asked Ambassador Thylos of the Vryn, his tone carrying barely concealed hostility. He had been forced to join the expedition as part of his species' accountability agreement. "By surviving," Thomas replied simply. The fortress grew larger as they approached, revealing details that the initial scans had missed. The hexagonal plates that formed its outer shell were not solid, but composed of interlocking layers, each one spinning slowly in a different direction. The patterns carved into their surfaces were mathematical equations expressed in a language that predated all known forms of communication. "I am detecting an opening," Vestra reported. "Port side, approximately 2 kilometers from our current position. It appears to be responding to our approach." Thomas nodded. This matched his first visit. The fortress recognized returning visitors. Whether that recognition would translate to welcome or hostility remained uncertain. The vessel slipped through the opening into a docking bay that dwarfed anything humanity had ever constructed. The space could have held 1,000 ships the size of theirs with room to spare. But it was empty, filled only with dust that had accumulated over millennia of abandonment. "Atmospheric readings are stable," the science officer announced. "Pressure and composition match standard galactic requirements. Temperature is comfortable for carbon-based life forms." "It is almost as if the fortress knew we were coming." "It did," Thomas said. "The moment I activated the beacon during my first visit, the fortress began preparing for additional visitors. The predecessors did not believe in wasting resources. If no one was present, the internal systems remained dormant. But now that we are here, everything is waking up." As if to confirm his words, lights began activating along the walls of the docking bay. Not the harsh illumination of technological efficiency, but a soft, organic glow that seemed to pulse with something like breath. The fortress was alive in ways that defied easy categorization. The delegation assembled at the ship's main exit, each species equipped with appropriate environmental gear. Thomas took his place at the front, carrying only a small pack containing translation equipment and emergency supplies. "Remember the protocols," he said, addressing the group. "We stay together. We do not touch anything without consensus. And we do not attempt to remove any objects from the fortress until we understand what we are dealing with. You presume to give orders to species far older than your own." Thylos snapped. "I presume to follow the same guidelines I used to survive my first visit," Thomas replied evenly. "The predecessors were not hostile, but they were protective. There are defensive systems throughout this structure that will activate if they perceive a threat. Careful observation and respect will keep us alive. Arrogance will get us killed." Thylos fell silent, though his many limbs twitched with irritation. The group moved through the docking bay and into the fortress proper. Thomas led them along corridors he had explored before, pointing out features that his translation equipment could interpret. The walls were covered in the history of the predecessors, a species that had ruled the galaxy for 20 million years before choosing to depart for reasons that remained unclear. They grew tired of this reality, Thomas explained as they walked. According to their records, they had solved every problem physical existence could offer. Disease, death, resource scarcity, conflict, all of it became trivial once their technology reached its peak. They sought new challenges in dimensions beyond our understanding. "And they left all of this behind?" asked Orna, a representative from a small species called the Telluri, who had never traveled beyond their home system before this expedition. Her voice carried wonder rather than skepticism. "They considered it their final gift," Thomas said. "Knowledge accumulated across billions of years, preserved for whoever came after. But they also feared that gift would be misused. That is why they sealed the fortress and hid its location. They wanted future civilizations to earn access rather than simply taking it." The corridor opened into a vast chamber that made several delegation members gasp. It was the archive Thomas had described during his trial, a space filled with crystalline storage matrices arranged in patterns that suggested organization beyond human comprehension. Each crystal contained more data than all of humanity's combined knowledge, and there were millions of them. "This is just one section," Thomas said softly. "There are 17 others like it, each one focused on a different area of knowledge. Medicine, physics, psychology, art, philosophy, everything the predecessors considered worth preserving." Thylos moved toward the nearest crystal, reaching out with one limb to touch its surface. "Do not," Thomas said sharply. The Vryn ambassador hesitated, then withdrew his limb. "You said we would catalog everything. How can we do that without direct interaction?" "We interact through the access terminals," Thomas replied, gesturing toward a series of pedestals arranged in a semicircle at the chamber's center. "They translate the crystal contents into forms that different species can understand. But the crystals themselves are dangerous to touch directly. They operate on quantum principles that can destabilize organic matter. He moved to one of the terminals and activated it, causing a holographic display to materialize above the pedestal. The display showed a menu of options written in the predecessor script, but also translated into the languages of every species present. "This is how we proceed," Thomas explained. "We select subjects. We review the information provided. We take notes using our own equipment. And we discuss what we find before moving on." The delegation gathered around the terminals, each species taking a position that allowed them to observe. For the next several hours, they explored the archive's contents, discovering wonders that exceeded their wildest expectations. Medical techniques that could cure diseases affecting hundreds of species. Energy generation methods that made even the most advanced council technology look primitive. Transportation systems that could move beings across the galaxy in moments rather than weeks. But there were also warnings. "This section is sealed," the science officer announced, pointing to a portion of the holographic menu that glowed with a different color. "The access code indicates it requires special authorization." Thomas examined the display, his translation equipment working to decode the protective protocols. His face grew pale as understanding dawned. "What is it?" Orna asked. "Weapons," Thomas said quietly. "Not just any weapons. The predecessors developed technology capable of destroying stars, eliminating entire species, reshaping reality itself, according to the user's will." The chamber fell silent as the implications settled over the delegation. They sealed these sections because they feared what would happen if such power fell into the wrong hands, Thomas continued. "According to the warning I am reading, previous civilizations destroyed themselves with this technology. The predecessors watched it happen 7 times before they finally decided to intervene." Thylos moved closer to the sealed section of the display. "But the information is still here, still accessible to someone with the proper knowledge." "Yes," Thomas admitted. "And that is the real test the predecessors left behind. Not whether we could find the fortress, but whether we would have the wisdom to leave certain knowledge untouched." The weight of that revelation hung over the expedition as they contemplated the choice before them. The fortress contained everything they could want, but also everything they should fear. And somewhere in its depths, sealed sections waited, holding power that could reshape or destroy the galaxy depending on who controlled it. The true challenge of the expedition had only just begun. 5 days into the expedition, Thomas woke to the sound of alarms. He scrambled from his makeshift sleeping quarters, pulling on his suit as red warning lights pulsed through the fortress corridors. The ancient structure had remained dormant during their exploration, but now it was screaming. "Report," he called into his communication device as he ran toward the archive chamber. Vestra's voice came through, tight with controlled fear. "Someone accessed the sealed wepo. End section. The fortress security protocols have activated. We are being locked down." Thomas felt ice spread through his chest. Who did it? Who accessed the weapons? Unknown. The terminals recorded an unauthorized entry approximately 4 minutes ago. Whoever it was used predecessor access codes that should not exist. The corridor ahead suddenly sealed, a massive door slamming down from the ceiling. Thomas skidded to a halt, barely avoiding collision with the barrier. Through the crystal windows beside the door, he could see the archive chamber beyond. Several delegation members were trapped inside, their forms visible through the distorted transparency. Among them was Thylos. The Vryn ambassador was standing at one of the terminals, his many limbs working frantically to download information. His posture radiated desperate urgency rather than the calculating patience Thomas had come to expect. "Open this door," Thomas demanded, pressing his palm against the access panel beside it. Unable to comply, The fortress responded, its voice emanating from the walls themselves. Security breach in progress. Containment protocols active. All unauthorized personnel will be removed. I am not unauthorized. I am the expedition leader. Your credentials have been revoked. Thomas slammed his fist against the panel in frustration. Through the window, he watched as Thylos finished whatever he was doing and turned to face a new doorway that had opened in the archive chamber's far wall. A doorway that led deeper into the fortress, toward sections that the expedition had not yet explored, the sealed weapons sections. This is a trap, Thomas realized aloud. Someone gave Thylos those access codes. Someone wanted him to trigger this lockdown. Your analysis is correct, the fortress voice confirmed, surprising Thomas with its willingness to communicate. The codes provided to the Vryn ambassador were designed to initiate containment while appearing to grant elevated access. The individual who provided them understood our protocols intimately. Who? Who gave him the codes? The fortress fell silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice carried something that might have been sadness. A fragment of our creators remains within this installation. It has observed your expedition since your arrival. It believes that the galactic civilization you represent is not ready for the knowledge we contain. Thomas felt the world shift beneath him. A fragment? You mean a predecessor is still here? Not alive in the sense you would understand. A consciousness preserved within our systems, maintaining watch over the archive. It has waited for 70,000 years, evaluating every civilization that managed to locate this place. All have been found wanting. Your expedition is no exception. Then why let us in at all? Because the decision was not made by the fragment alone. The beacon you activated during your first visit alerted other systems that believe the choice should belong to the living rather than the preserved dead. There is disagreement within this installation about how to proceed. Thomas pressed his forehead against the cool crystal of the window, watching as Thylos disappeared into the deeper sections of the fortress. The Vryn had been manipulated, but that did not change the danger he now represented. If he reached the weapons archive, if he managed to extract even a fraction of its contents, the balance of power in the galaxy would be destroyed. Can you stop him? Thomas asked. We could. We could eliminate the Vryn ambassador and all members of your expedition. We could seal this installation forever and erase all record of its location from the universe. We have done so before with 7 previous civilizations. But you are not doing that. No, because you are here. Because you, human Thomas Reed, represent something the fragment did not anticipate. What? Hope, not the hope of the powerful who seek greater power, not the hope of the clever who seek advantage over their rivals, but the hope of the explorer who seeks knowledge for its own sake. You found us not because you wanted to rule the galaxy, but because you wanted to understand it. The fortress fell silent again, and Thomas sensed that something was being debated behind the walls, within systems he could not perceive. Finally, the door in front of him opened. The fragment has agreed to a test, the fortress announced. You will pursue the Vryn ambassador. You will reach him before he can extract the weapons archive. And you will demonstrate, through your actions, whether your civilization deserves the knowledge we contain. Thomas did not hesitate. He ran through the archive chamber, past the other trapped delegation members who called out questions he could not stop to answer, and into the corridor Thylos had taken. The deeper sections of the fortress were different from the areas they had explored. The walls pulsed with an energy that made Thomas's teeth ache. The air itself seemed thicker, resistant to movement. Time felt wrong here, stretched and compressed in ways that disoriented his senses. He found Thylos in a chamber that hurt to look at directly. The Vryn was standing before a terminal that glowed with the same warning color Thomas had seen in the archive. his limbs trembling as data streamed into a portable storage device. "Stop," Thomas called out. Phylos turned, and Thomas was shocked by what he saw. The ambassador's eyes were wild, desperate, filled with a fear that seemed far too intense for the situation. "You do not understand," Phylos said, his voice cracking. "My species is dying. The Council's judgment, the revelation of how we obtained our technology, it has torn our civilization apart. Civil war has erupted on 17 worlds. Billions have already died." Thomas slowed his approach, keeping his hands visible. "I did not know." The communications from the Council, they said nothing about this. Because the Council wishes to maintain the illusion of order. But order is collapsing. The species that benefited from the fortress technology are being targeted for retaliation. The species that were denied are taking their revenge. The galaxy is burning human, and it will only grow worse. "And you think weapons will solve this?" Phylos gestured at the terminal with one trembling limb. "I think weapons will ensure my people survive. If we possess power that others cannot match, we will be protected. If we are vulnerable, we will be destroyed. That is the same logic that led your species to steal from this place in the first place," Thomas said carefully. "The same logic that created the inequality that is now tearing the galaxy apart. More weapons will not bring peace. They will only ensure that when the wars end, nothing remains." Easy words from a representative of a species that has nothing to lose. Humanity is young, small, insignificant. The great powers will ignore you while they destroy each other. You will inherit whatever remains of the galaxy without lifting a finger. Thomas shook his head slowly. "That is not what we want. Humanity did not reveal the truth about the fortress to watch the galaxy burn. We revealed it because we believed that equality, real equality, was worth fighting for. We believed that civilizations could change." He took another step forward, close enough now to see the data streaming across Phylos' storage device. Weapons specifications, targeting systems, destructive capabilities that could eliminate entire star systems. "Put it down," Thomas said quietly. "Let me help you find another way. There is no other way. There is always another way. Your species has existed for 2 million years. You have survived catastrophes that would have destroyed humanity 1,000 times over. You do not need weapons to survive this. You need allies. You need trust. You need to show the galaxy that you are willing to face consequences for what you did, and to help build something better." Phylos was silent for a long moment, his limbs no longer trembling but frozen in indecision. "If I return without this," he said finally, "my government will be overthrown. My family will be executed. Everything I have worked to build will be destroyed. If you return with this," Thomas replied, "the same thing will happen, only slower and with more suffering. You will buy your species years, maybe decades. But eventually, someone will develop weapons to match yours. And the war that follows will leave nothing behind." The chamber around them pulsed with energy, the fortress watching and waiting. "There is a third option," Thomas continued. "Come back to the delegation. Tell them what happened, what you were offered, and what you chose not to take. Show the galaxy that the Vryn are capable of rejecting the easy path, even when they are afraid. It will not save everyone. It will not fix everything. But it might be enough to start rebuilding trust." Phylos looked at the terminal, at the storage device still receiving deadly data, and at the human who had somehow followed him into the depths of an ancient impossibility. Then, slowly, he reached out and disconnected the device. The fortress responded immediately, the warning colors fading from the terminal, the oppressive energy in the air beginning to dissipate. "The test is complete," the ancient voice announced. "You have chosen well." Thomas allowed himself to breathe. The crisis was not over. The galaxy was still in chaos. But for one moment, in one chamber of an ancient fortress, two species had chosen trust over fear. It was a beginning. The Galactic Council chamber was filled once more. But the atmosphere had changed completely from that first terrible trial. Where fear and hostility had once dominated, something new had taken its place. Thomas Reed stood at the same accused platform where he had faced execution, but now he stood as an honored guest. Beside him were the 12 members of the Fortress expedition, including Thylos, whose presence here was itself a statement that echoed across the galaxy. The Grand Arbiter hovered at the chamber's apex, its geometric forms spinning with patterns that Thomas had learned to recognize as satisfaction. This council has gathered to hear the report of the expedition to the two predecessor archive, the Arbiter announced, and to witness a new chapter in galactic history. Thomas stepped forward, activating a holographic display that filled the chamber with images from the fortress. The assembled species watched in wonder as he described what they had found, what they had learned, and what they had chosen not to take. The archive contains knowledge beyond anything we imagined, he said. Cures for diseases that have plagued species for millions of years. Energy sources that could end resource conflicts forever. Transportation technology that would connect the most distant corners of the galaxy. The images shifted, showing the sealed weapons sections that Thylos had briefly accessed. But it also contains power that would destroy us. Weapons capable of ending civilizations with a single command. The predecessors knew this. They faced the same choice we face now, whether to trust future generations with everything, or to protect them from their own worst impulses. Thomas turned to face the full council, meeting the eyes and sensors of species from across the galaxy. They chose protection. They sealed the weapons archive and hid the fortress, hoping that whoever found it would be wise enough to leave those sections closed. "And what is your recommendation?" the Arbiter asked. Thomas took a deep breath. This was the moment everything had been building toward. "My recommendation is that we do what the predecessors could not. We distribute the beneficial knowledge immediately to every species equally. The medical advances, the energy technology, the transportation systems, all of it shared openly, with no species receiving advantages over any other." Murmurs spread through the chamber, some approving and others skeptical. "And the weapons archive?" a Col-3 representative demanded. "The weapons archive remains sealed, not by council decree, which can be overturned, but by physical destruction. We collapse the sections of the fortress that contain the most dangerous technology, removing them permanently from the universe." The murmurs became shouts. Some species were horrified at the idea of destroying predecessor knowledge. Others were relieved. And some, Thomas could see, were already calculating how they might access the weapons before they could be destroyed. Thylos stepped forward, his presence silencing the chamber more effectively than any command could have. "I speak as one who was tempted," the Vryn ambassador said, his voice carrying across the vast space. "I held the power to destroy civilizations in my hands. I could have returned to my people with weapons that would have ensured our dominance for millennia." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "I chose not to, not because the humans stopped me, though he tried, but because I realized that such power would not save my species. It would only ensure that our destruction, when it came, would be complete. The weapons we might use against others would eventually be used against us." Thylos turned to face the species that had been most hostile to the Vryn in recent days. "I cannot undo what my civilization did. We took knowledge that was not ours. We built advantages on a foundation of theft. But I can commit to something different. The Vryn will share everything we obtained from the fortress. Our communication technology, our advanced systems, all of it will be made available to every species in this chamber. The Kolthari delegate rose, her crest raised in what might have been aggression or respect. The Kolthari will do the same. Our shield technology will be shared openly. One by one, the species that had benefited from stolen fortress technology rose to make similar commitments. Not all of them were sincere, Thomas knew. Some would resist when the time came to actually deliver on their promises. But the public declarations created pressure that would be difficult to escape. The Arbiter's geometric forms pulsed with something Thomas had never seen before. If he had to name it, he would have called it hope. "This council accepts the expedition's recommendations," the Arbiter announced. "A new treaty will be drafted, establishing equal access to predecessor knowledge for all member species. The weapons archive will be destroyed under supervision of a mixed delegation. And a new era of galactic cooperation will begin." The chamber erupted in sounds of celebration and debate, the complex political machinery of the galaxy already beginning to process what had happened. Thomas watched it all with a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. A small figure approached him through the crowd. It was Orna, the representative from the Telluri species, who had never traveled beyond her home system before the expedition. "Your people have done something remarkable," she said, her voice soft but clear. "In 300 years of space travel, humanity has changed the galaxy more than civilizations that have existed for millions of years." Thomas shook his head. "We did not do this alone. Every species on that expedition contributed. Every civilization in this chamber will be part of what comes next. Perhaps, but it was a human who found the fortress, a human who challenged the council, and a human who convinced a Vryn ambassador to put down weapons that could have made his species invincible." Orna tilted her head in a gesture Thomas had learned meant respect. "You have a quality that elder species have forgotten." "What quality is that?" "The ability to believe in impossible things. To look at a galaxy filled with ancient, powerful beings and somehow convince yourself that a young species from a small planet could make a difference." Thomas smiled, thinking of his grandmother, who had spent her life decoding a predecessor map, of his parents who had supported his dreams of exploration, of every human who had ever looked at the stars and refused to believe they were beyond reach. "It is not about believing in the impossible," he said. "It is about refusing to accept limits that were never real in the first place." The fortress hung in space, its beacon still pulsing, but now carrying a different message. Where once it had called out to any who could find it, now it announced a new purpose, a library for all species, a monument to what could be achieved when civilizations chose cooperation over competition. In the years that followed, the galaxy changed in ways that would have seemed impossible before Thomas's discovery. Species that had been enemies for millennia began working together. Technologies that had been hoarded by the powerful were shared with the weak. The conflicts that had been tearing civilizations apart slowly gave way to something resembling peace. It was not perfect. Nothing ever was. Old hatreds did not disappear overnight. Some species resisted sharing their advantages. Others tried to find ways around the new treaties, but the direction had changed. Where the galaxy had been moving toward fragmentation and war, it now moved toward integration and cooperation. And at the center of it all, humanity young, fragile, short-lived humanity served as a reminder that even the smallest voice could change the course of history. Thomas Reed returned to Earth as the most famous human in the galaxy. He received offers of positions, titles, and powers that would have made him one of the most influential beings in existence. He refused them all. Instead, he returned to exploration, traveling to the distant corners of the galaxy in search of more discoveries. The predecessors had left maps on many worlds, he knew. Earth was just the first. And somewhere out there, other wonders waited to be found. The fortress remained, a testament to what the predecessors had built and what the living had chosen to become. Its weapons sections collapsed into nothingness. But its knowledge sections continued to grow, filled with contributions from species across the galaxy and on quiet nights. When the stars shone bright above countless worlds, beings of every shape and form looked up and wondered what discoveries tomorrow would bring. The galaxy was no longer a place of secrets and hoarded power. It was a place of possibility, all because one human had followed a map left by ancient beings who had believed, against all evidence, that the future could be better than the past. That belief had changed everything. And this was only the beginning.